A black boy missed his interview to help a stranger, unaware the stranger was the owner. The alarm blared at 5:30 a.m., but Jalen Carter had already been awake for 20 minutes, staring at the ceiling of his small bedroom, mentally rehearsing answers to interview questions. Today wasn't just any day, it was the day. The culmination of 4 years of double majoring in computer science and business administration, working night shifts at the campus library, and surviving on ramen noodles to save every possible penny. Jalen sat up and took a deep breath. Through the thin walls of their apartment, he could hear his mother already moving around in the kitchen. She had taken an extra night shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse's aide just to help him buy the train ticket to downtown for this interview. The thought made his chest tighten with both gratitude and determination. "You up, baby?" His mother's voice called from the hallway. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, swinging his legs over the bed. "Been up." He padded to the bathroom and faced himself in the mirror. His dark skin showed the faint shadows of sleeplessness, but his eyes burned with purpose. At 22, Jalen carried himself with a quiet dignity that belied the hardships he'd faced growing up in West Side Heights, a neighborhood that the city's economic boom had somehow forgotten. "Today's the day," he told his reflection. "You got this." The shower's lukewarm water helped clear his head as he mentally reviewed his research on BrightBridge Solutions. Founded 15 years ago, it had quickly risen to become one of the country's most innovative tech firms, with a notoriously selective hiring process. Less than 2% of applicants made it through all 3 rounds of interviews. Jalen had somehow survived the first 2. Now, only the final round stood between him and a future that once seemed impossible. His mother, Denise Carter, had laid out breakfast when he emerged: eggs, toast, and sliced fruit that he knew she couldn't really afford. "Mom, you didn't have to." "Hush now," she interrupted, her hands on her hips but her eyes soft with pride. "My son doesn't go to the biggest interview of his life on an empty stomach." They ate together in comfortable silence until Denise reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Your father would be so proud of you today," she said softly. Jalen nodded, his throat suddenly tight. His father had died when Jalen was just 11, leaving Denise to raise him alone. A construction accident had taken Michael Carter's life, but not before he had instilled in his son the values that guided him still: honesty, hard work, and most importantly, kindness. "Remember what Dad always said," Jalen replied, squeezing her hand back. "Education might open doors, but character decides if you get to stay." After breakfast, Jalen retreated to his room to dress. He carefully removed his only suit from its plastic covering, a charcoal gray 2-piece that he and his mother had found at a second-hand store and had tailored with money saved from his campus job. He polished his shoes one final time, brushed invisible lint from his shoulders, and adjusted his tie in the mirror. His phone buzzed with a text from his best friend, Marcus. "Knock 'em today, man." "You got this." Jalen smiled and typed back, "Thanks, bro." One step away from changing everything. The weight of that statement wasn't lost on him. This wasn't just a job, it was a lifeline. BrightBridge's starting salary was triple what most of his classmates were being offered elsewhere. It meant his mother could finally quit her second job. It meant moving her out of their neighborhood to somewhere safer. It meant stability. "Oh, look at you!" his mother gasped when he emerged from his room. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Handsome as your father." She straightened his already straight tie, a mother's instinctive gesture. From her pocket, she produced a small, worn leather case. "I want you to wear these today," she said, opening it to reveal a pair of modest gold cufflinks. "They were your father's. He wore them the day he interviewed for his foreman position." Jalen swallowed hard as she helped attach them to his shirt cuffs. "Thanks, Mom," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. "No," she said, stepping back to appraise him. "You remember what Mr. Washington next door taught you about those handshakes? Firm, not crushing. Eye contact. No fidgeting," Jalen recited, smiling at the memory of their elderly neighbor drilling him on business etiquette. "That's right. And you've got all your materials? Jalen patted his leather portfolio, another graduation gift from his mother that must have cost her weeks of savings. Resume copies, references, certifications, and my project portfolio. All set. She checked the time and nodded. You should go. Train leaves in 30 minutes. At the door, she straightened his lapels one last time and held his face between her hands. No matter what happens today, I am already so proud of you. You hear me? I hear you, he said, bending to kiss her cheek. But I'm going to make you even prouder. The spring morning was cool but promising as Jalen walked briskly to the train station. The familiar sights of his neighborhood scrolled by. The corner bodega where he'd bought penny candy as a child, the basketball court where he'd spent countless afternoons, the community center where he still volunteered teaching coding to kids on weekends. On the train, Jalen reviewed his notes one last time, mentally rehearsing responses to potential questions. Around him, the car filled with commuters in various states of morning weariness. But Jalen felt electrified, every nerve ending alive with anticipation and nervous energy. The train emerged from the tunnel into downtown, and the city's skyline came into view. Somewhere in that forest of glass and steel was the Brightbridge Tower, and in it, the office where his future waited to be determined. The thought sent a fresh wave of anxiety through him, which he countered by recalling his father's words. Fear is just excitement without the breath. So breathe, son. Jalen took a deep breath and closed his eyes, centering himself. When the train arrived at his stop, Jalen was the first one out the doors. He checked the time, 8:15 a.m. His interview was at 9 a.m., giving him plenty of time to find the building and compose himself before meeting with the hiring committee. As he navigated the busy downtown streets, Jalen felt both out of place and exactly where he belonged. He had earned his spot in this concrete jungle of opportunity through years of hard work and sacrifice. The Brightbridge building stood 40 stories tall, its glass exterior reflecting the morning sun like a beacon. Jalen paused across the street, taking in the magnitude of the moment. Inside that building was not just a job, but a future, his future. He straightened his tie one last time, checked that his father's cufflinks were secure, and stepped off the curb. As he approached the building, Jalen noticed a text from the HR coordinator. Mr. Carter, please note there has been a slight change. You are the final candidate being interviewed today, and the hiring decision will be made immediately afterward. Your punctuality is appreciated. The stakes had just gotten higher. He wasn't just one of several candidates today, he was the last one. The final impression. The decision would be made right after his interview. Every second counted now. With renewed determination, Jalen quickened his pace. The morning crowd parted around him as he moved with purpose, his mind focused on the challenge ahead. In his head, he could hear his mother's voice. You were born for this moment, baby. And he believed her. All the late nights studying, all the sacrifices, all the doubts and fears, they had led to this moment. Jalen Carter was ready to step into his future, unaware that fate had a different test in store for him just a few blocks away. Jalen checked his watch as he turned onto 9th Street, 8:42 a.m. The Brightbridge building loomed just 2 blocks ahead, its glass facade gleaming in the morning sun. Perfect timing. He'd arrive with 15 minutes to spare, enough time to collect himself before the final interview that could change everything. The street bustled with the usual downtown morning crowd, suited professionals clutching coffee cups, delivery personnel weaving through pedestrians, tourists consulting maps on their phones. Jalen walked with purpose, mentally reciting his prepared answers one last time. His father's cufflinks caught the sunlight, a small reminder of all that was at stake. That's when he heard it, a sharp gasp followed by the distinctive sound of items scattering across concrete. He looked up to see an elderly woman stumbling, her grocery bags spilling their contents across the sidewalk. Oranges rolled in every direction. A carton of eggs cracked open on the pavement. A bottle of milk teetered on the curb before toppling over, creating a white puddle that snaked toward the gutter. The woman, small-framed with silver hair and a floral dress that seemed too light for the spring morning, reached out to steady herself against the parking meter. Her face, lined with age, registered both pain and frustration. What struck Jalen most, however, was how people simply flowed around her like water around a rock. Some glanced her way but continued walking. Others seemed not to notice at all, eyes fixed on phones or watches or the middle distance of their own preoccupations. Jalen hesitated. He checked his watch again, 8:44 a.m. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. Always lend a hand to those who need it. That's what makes us human. Alongside it, he heard the HR coordinator's text. Your punctuality is appreciated. For 3 heartbeats, he stood frozen in the moral calculus of the moment. Then, almost without conscious decision, he was moving toward the woman, his expensive leather portfolio tucked securely under one arm. Ma'am, he said, crouching beside her. Are you all right? Let me help you with this. Up close, he could see she was older than he'd first thought, perhaps in her late 70s, with hands that trembled slightly as she attempted to gather her scattered groceries. Oh, thank you, young man, she said, her voice carrying the slight musical lilt of a southern accent. These old legs just aren't what they used to be. Jalen quickly collected the rolling oranges, salvaged what groceries he could, and helped the woman to a nearby bench. He noticed a small scrape on her palm where she'd caught herself. You're hurt, he said, pulling a clean handkerchief from his pocket, another of his mother's touches for his interview day. It's nothing, dear, she assured him, though she accepted the handkerchief gratefully. Just a scratch. But my groceries. She looked at the damaged items with dismay. Which items were ruined? I can replace them for you, Jalen offered, then added, I'm Jalen, by the way. Florence, she replied with a warm smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. Florence Waverly. And you don't need to do that, Jalen. You've already been so kind. It's no trouble, he insisted, though he glanced at his watch again, 8:49 a.m. He still had time, but it was getting tighter. After helping her replace the ruined items at a corner store, Jalen faced another dilemma when Florence mentioned she lived several blocks away. I can't possibly carry all this home now, she sighed. Jalen swallowed hard, knowing what the right thing to do was, even as his watch seemed to tick louder against his wrist. I'd be happy to help you get these home, Mrs. Waverly. Her face brightened. Would you? That's very kind. It's not far, just past Cedar Avenue. Cedar Avenue. That was at least a 15-minute walk in the opposite direction from Brightbridge. Jalen's heart sank, but his resolve didn't waver. He'd come too far in life by doing the right thing to abandon his principles now. Lead the way, he said, gathering the grocery bags. Their walk took longer than expected. Florence moved slowly, stopping occasionally to catch her breath. She chatted about the neighborhood, how it had changed over the decades, and asked Jalen about himself. He found himself sharing his hopes for the interview, his mother's sacrifices, and his dreams of creating educational technology for underserved communities. You remind me of my son, Florence remarked. Always thinking of others, even when pursuing his own dreams. When they finally reached her brownstone, Jalen's heart was pounding, and not from exertion. He checked his watch, 9:18 a.m. The interview had started 18 minutes ago. Thank you, Jalen, Florence said earnestly as he placed her groceries on her kitchen counter. Not many would have stopped. You're a rare young man. It was the right thing to do, he replied simply, already backing toward the door. You're going to be late for something important, aren't you? She asked, her eyes sharp with understanding. Jalen nodded, his throat tight. I'm afraid I already am. As he raced back toward Brightbridge, his dress shoes pounding the pavement, Jalen knew with crushing certainty that his one shot at changing his family's future had just slipped through his fingers, all for a stranger's groceries and a 15-minute act of kindness. And yet, somewhere beneath the panic and regret, his father's words resurfaced. Character decides if you get to stay. He just hoped he'd get the chance to walk through the door first. Jalen burst through the revolving doors of the Brightbridge building at 9:42 a.m., his previously immaculate appearance now showing signs of his desperate sprint. A thin sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead, and his carefully polished shoes bore scuff marks from his race against time. His breath came in quick gasps as he approached the reception desk, clutching his portfolio like a lifeline. The lobby of Brightbridge Solutions was a testament to the company's success. Minimalist white furniture arranged on gleaming marble floors, living walls of lush greenery framing a massive digital display that cycled through the firm's achievements and innovations. Under different circumstances, Jalen would have paused to admire it all. Now, he barely registered his surroundings. "I'm here for a 9 a.m. interview," he said to the receptionist, a woman with sharp features and a blunt platinum bob. "Jalen Carter. I understand I'm late, and I sincerely apologize." She regarded him with clinical detachment, her manicured fingers already tapping at her keyboard. "Mr. Carter," she confirmed, looking at her screen rather than at him. "Your interview was scheduled for 9 a.m. It is now 9:42 a.m. "Yes, ma'am. There was an emergency." She held up one hand, cutting him off. "The hiring committee has already interviewed all candidates and moved into deliberations." Her tone was not unkind, merely factual. "The candidate list has been closed." The words hit Jalen like a physical blow. "Is there any way, perhaps I could wait? If they have even 5 minutes." "I'm afraid that's not possible." Her eyes finally met his, and for a moment, Jalen thought he detected a flicker of sympathy. It vanished quickly. "Mr. Bailey from HR was quite clear about punctuality in his communications with you." Jalen nodded, remembering the text he'd received that morning. He was. In this industry, and especially at Brightbridge, timeliness isn't just preferred, it's required. "You should have been on time. That's how this world works." Her words carried the weight of a final judgment. Jalen stood still, absorbing the impact of what this meant. 4 years of college, countless all-nighters, his mother's sacrifices, all the hopes he'd carried into this building, deflated in an instant. Yet even as disappointment coursed through him, he refused to let it show. His father had always said dignity was something no one could take from you unless you surrendered it. "I understand," he said, straightening his shoulders. "Thank you for your time." He turned to leave, then paused. A part of him wanted to explain, to tell her about Florence Waverly and her spilled groceries, about helping her home despite knowing what it might cost him. But what good would excuses do now? And somehow, turning an act of kindness into a plea for special treatment felt wrong. "Is there anything else, Mr. Carter?" the receptionist asked, her attention already returning to her screen. "No," Jalen replied after a moment. "Thank you again." The same revolving door that had admitted him with such hope now ushered him back into the spring morning, the day suddenly feeling much colder than when he'd entered. Jalen walked a half-block before his legs seemed to give out, and he found himself sinking onto a bench outside a small cafe. He sat there, portfolio balanced on his knees, and removed his father's cufflinks, carefully placing them back in their worn leather case. The weight of his failure pressed down on him. How would he tell his mother? What would he do now? The carefully constructed future he'd been building had just collapsed like a house of cards. A barista emerged from the cafe and placed a cup of water beside him on the bench. "Looked like you could use this," she said with a small smile before returning inside. Jalen didn't respond, barely registering the small kindness. He removed his scuffed dress shoes, giving his feet a moment's relief. The shoes, like his hopes, had taken a beating today. As he sat there, the memory of Florence Waverly's grateful smile floated back to him. Would he have done anything differently? The answer came without hesitation, no. Even knowing the outcome, he would still have helped her. That realization didn't make the sting of rejection any less painful, but it grounded him somehow. A group of successful-looking executives walked past, their conversation a buzz of industry jargon and confident laughter. They didn't even glance his way, just another invisible young black man on a city bench. If only they knew how close he'd come to joining their ranks. Jalen took out his phone, thumb hovering over his mother's contact. He couldn't bring himself to call her yet. Instead, he texted Marcus, "Missed the interview. Long story. Could use a friend tonight." The reply came almost instantly, I'm here for you, bro, whatever you need. Jalen's vision blurred as he put his shoes back on. He might have lost his shot at Brightbridge, but he still had people who believed in him. Maybe that was enough for today. As he stood to leave, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in a nearby storefront window, suit slightly rumpled, tie loosened, but standing straight, shoulders back. His father would be proud of that at least. Sometimes the right path isn't the easy one, he murmured to himself, words his father had repeated often. With one last look at the towering Brightbridge building in the distance, Jalen turned and walked away, unaware that his rejection was far from the final chapter in his story with the company. Behind him, the city continued its relentless pace, indifferent to the small dramas that unfolded on its streets, the missed opportunities, the acts of kindness, and the unexpected connections that sometimes changed everything. Florence Waverly moved slowly through her elegant brownstone, putting away the groceries Jalen had carried home for her. Her thoughts kept returning to the young man, his gentle manner, his obvious intelligence, and most notably, his willingness to sacrifice something important to help a stranger. In her 76 years, she'd seen how rare such qualities had become in this hurried world. She paused by the window, watching as clouds gathered over the city skyline. The Brightbridge Tower stood prominently among the other buildings, its distinctive architecture unmistakable even from this distance. Florence smiled slightly at the sight. What Jalen couldn't have known was that she had watched that building rise from the ground 15 years ago, had attended its opening ceremony, had celebrated every milestone it reached. With deliberate movements, she picked up her phone and dialed a number from memory. "Thomas Waverly's office," answered a crisp, professional voice. "Hello, Judith. It's Florence," she said warmly. "Is my son available? Mrs. Waverly." "Of course, let me put you through right away." There was a brief pause before a deep, resonant voice came on the line. "Mom? Everything okay? You rarely call during business hours." "Everything's fine, Thomas," she assured him. "Though I had a bit of an incident this morning." Thomas Waverly, CEO of Brightbridge Solutions, immediately shifted from business mode to concerned son. "What happened? Are you hurt? Should I send Dr. Michaels over?" "Oh, stop fussing," Florence chided gently. "I just had a little stumble with my groceries on 9th Street. Nothing serious. And you're only telling me this now? I'll send a car." "Thomas," she interrupted firmly. "I'm perfectly fine. That's not why I'm calling." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "All right," he said finally. "Then what is it?" Florence settled into her favorite armchair, the one that faced a wall of family photographs chronicling the Waverly family history. "I want to tell you about a young man who helped me today. A respectful young man with nothing but a bright smile, who gave up something important just to make sure I got home safe." She recounted the story in detail, how Jalen had stopped when no one else would, how he'd carefully collected her groceries, replaced the damaged items, and insisted on carrying everything to her home despite clearly being in a hurry. She described his worn but well-polished shoes, his meticulously pressed suit, and the way he'd spoken about his mother and his education with such quiet pride. "He mentioned he was late for a job interview," Florence said, coming to the point of her call. "At Brightbridge. His name is Jalen Carter." The line went quiet for a moment. Florence could picture her son straightening in his chair, his interest piqued. Thomas had built his company on not just innovation, but on a foundation of specific values: integrity, excellence, and compassion, values she had worked hard to instill in him after his father's death. "Carter," Thomas repeated thoughtfully. "Let me check something." Florence heard the faint sound of typing in the background. "HR just finalized today's interviews," Thomas said after a moment. "Carter Jalen. He's listed as a no-show for the final round." "Well, he wasn't a no-show," Florence said with a hint of indignation. "He was helping an old woman who couldn't carry her own groceries. He knew he was missing something important. I could see it in his eyes when he checked his watch, but he helped me anyway." Another pause, longer this time. "Tell me more about him." Thomas said, his voice carrying a new note of interest. Florence smiled, knowing she had her son's full attention now. He's graduating from state with a double major. Wants to develop educational software for underserved communities. Talks about his mother the way you used to talk about me, like she hung the moon and stars. She let her words sink in before continuing. You're always saying you can teach technical skills, but you can't teach character. Well, this young man has character in spades, Thomas. Mom, are you trying to influence my hiring decisions? There was a touch of amusement in his voice now. I'm simply sharing an observation, she replied innocently. What you do with it is entirely up to you. She could almost hear her son thinking, weighing options, considering implications, the same methodical approach that had made him successful in business. His address? Thomas asked finally. He didn't say. But he mentioned volunteering at a community center in West Side Heights. More typing sounds. I can find him, Thomas said with the confidence of a man who had built an empire on finding solutions to problems. What are you planning, Thomas? Florence asked, though she already had an inkling. I'm not sure yet, he replied. But I think we may have missed something important in our interview process. After they said their goodbyes, Florence placed her phone on the side table and gazed out at the city skyline again. She thought of Jalen Carter, probably devastated right now, unaware that his simple act of kindness had set larger wheels in motion. Sometimes life's most important tests don't happen in an interview room, she murmured to herself, a knowing smile playing across her weathered face. In the photograph on the wall behind her, a younger Florence stood beside her late husband and a teenage Thomas at the groundbreaking ceremony for what would become Brightbridge Solutions. The company motto was just visible on the ceremonial shovel. Innovation with integrity. 15 years later, that integrity was about to be tested in a way none of them could have anticipated, through an encounter between an elderly woman with a dropped bag of groceries and a young man who chose kindness over opportunity. 2 days had passed since Jalen's missed interview, and he'd cycled through every stage of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, before finally reaching a tentative acceptance. Life would go on. There would be other opportunities, even if none quite as promising as Brightbridge. The West Side Heights Community Center buzzed with its usual Thursday afternoon energy, as Jalen supervised the youth coding class he'd founded 3 years ago. Today, he'd put aside his disappointment to focus on his 12 students, ages 10 to 16, who were creating simple games using the programming concepts he'd taught them. Mr. Jalen, I can't get my sprite to move right, called Deshawn, a bright-eyed 11-year-old whose enthusiasm often outpaced his attention to detail. Let's take a look, Jalen said, crouching beside the boy's workstation. Remember what we said about semicolons? As Deshawn corrected his code with newfound understanding, Jalen felt a familiar satisfaction. This was why he'd started the program, to give kids from his neighborhood tools they weren't getting in school, the same tools that had opened doors for him. After class ended, Jalen stayed behind to clean up. He wiped down tables spotted with juice box stains and collected forgotten notebooks, his mind drifting back to the question that had plagued him for 2 days: how to tell his mother about the interview. So far, he'd managed to avoid the conversation, claiming exhaustion or a late study session when she asked how it went. He was so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't immediately notice Ms. Taylor, the center's director, entering with a visitor. Jalen, she called, her voice carrying a note of unusual formality. There's someone here to see you. Jalen looked up, a damp cloth still in his hand, and froze. Even if he hadn't regularly browsed business magazines and tech websites, he would have recognized Thomas Waverly, the distinctive silver at his temples, the confident posture, the bespoke suit that made Jalen's second-hand one look like a Halloween costume by comparison. Mr. Carter, Thomas Waverly said, extending a hand. I hope I'm not interrupting. Jalen wiped his palms on his jeans before accepting the handshake. No, sir. I was just cleaning up after my coding class. Ms. Taylor sensed the gravity of the moment and discreetly withdrew, leaving the two men alone amid the community center's mismatched furniture and motivational posters. I understand you missed an appointment with my company Tuesday morning. Waverly said, his expression unreadable. Jalen's stomach dropped. Had the CEO of Brightbridge personally come to tell him how unprofessional he'd been? To ensure he never applied to any tech company in the city again? Yes, sir, I did, Jalen admitted, choosing honesty over excuses. It was the biggest opportunity I've ever had, and I missed it. May I ask why? There was something in Waverly's tone, not accusation, but genuine curiosity. Jalen hesitated. There was an elderly woman who needed help. Her groceries spilled on 9th Street, and she couldn't get home without assistance. And you chose to help her, knowing you would miss your interview? I didn't plan to miss it, Jalen clarified. I thought I could help her and still make it on time. But she lived farther away than I expected, and she needed to rest a few times along the way. Waverly nodded thoughtfully. So at what point did you realize you would definitely be late? Jalen recalled the moment with perfect clarity, checking his watch outside Florence's brownstone, seeing 9:18 a.m. glowing back at him. About 20 minutes after my scheduled time, sir. And you still took the time to bring her groceries inside? Yes, sir. Why not just leave them at the door once you realized you were late? The question seemed genuine rather than challenging. Jalen considered it carefully. Because the job wasn't finished until she and her groceries were safely inside, he replied simply. My mother raised me to complete what I start. Something flickered across Waverly's face, approval, perhaps, or recognition. The woman you helped, Waverly said, his tone shifting. Her name is Florence Waverly. She's my mother. The revelation hit Jalen like a physical blow. He stared at the CEO, searching for any family resemblance to the silver-haired woman he'd helped. I had no idea, he stammered. Of course you didn't, Waverly said with a small smile. That's what makes your actions so telling. He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope, which he placed on the table between them. My mother called me that day. Told me about a respectful young man with nothing but a bright smile, who gave up something important just to make sure I got home safe. Her words, not mine. Jalen remained silent, still processing this unexpected twist. When I checked with HR and found your name on the rejected list, for being a no-show, I was intrigued. We've built complicated systems at Brightbridge to identify the best talent, Mr. Carter. Multiple interview rounds, technical assessments, personality profiles. Yet somehow, we nearly miss you. Waverly tapped the envelope. Inside is an offer letter. The position is different from the one you interviewed for, better, actually. With more responsibility and commensurate compensation. Jalen stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it, afraid it might vanish if he did. I don't understand, he said finally. Waverly's expression softened. You passed the real interview, son. The one that matters most. He gestured around the community center. This work you're doing here, the choice you made on 9th Street, these things tell me more about who you are than any rehearsed answers in an interview room ever could. He extended his hand again, this time in congratulation rather than introduction. We'd be honored to have you at Brightbridge, Mr. Carter. That is, if you're still interested. Jalen grasped the offered hand, his voice momentarily failing him as the reality of what was happening sank in. Yes, sir, he managed finally. I am definitely still interested. Through the community center's windows, the afternoon sun cast long shadows, highlighting the path that had led Jalen from a chance encounter on 9th Street to this moment, a path guided by the invisible hand of character. 1 month later, Jalen stood in the elevator of the Brightbridge building, watching the floor numbers climb. His reflection in the polished doors showed a different man than the one who had been turned away at reception weeks earlier. Same face, same determined eyes, but now dressed in a new tailored suit, his first purchase after signing the offer letter. The elevator doors opened onto the 38th floor, revealing an open workspace humming with activity. Sleek workstations, collaboration areas with glass walls covered in code and diagrams, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Morning, Jalen, called out Priya, one of the senior developers who had taken him under her wing. Ready for the big presentation? Jalen nodded, both nervous and excited. Today, just 4 weeks into his new role as project lead for educational technologies, he would be presenting his first initiative to the executive team. "As ready as I'll ever be," he replied, setting his laptop down at his station. His workspace was minimalist, with just 2 personal touches: a photo of his mother on her first day in their new apartment, a safe, beautiful place in a good neighborhood that his Brightbridge salary had made possible, and a small, framed handkerchief. The same one he'd given Florence Waverly on 9th Street, which she had returned to him cleaned and pressed on his first day, with a note that read simply, "Never lose your kindness. The conference room is ready for you," said Mark, Thomas Waverly's executive assistant. "They're expecting you at 9. Jalen checked his watch, 8:45 a.m. "I'll be there on time," he said with a smile, the irony not lost on him. As he prepared his presentation materials, he reflected on the whirlwind of the past month. After accepting the position, he told his mother everything, about missing the interview, helping Florence, and Thomas Waverly's surprise visit. She cried, then laughed, then hugged him tightly, whispering, "Your father was right about character." The morning of his first day, Thomas had personally introduced him to the entire company during their all-hands meeting. Jalen had felt hundreds of curious eyes on him as he stood beside the CEO. "I want to share something important with all of you," Thomas had said, his voice carrying across the hushed room. "Jalen Carter isn't joining us because he aced a technical interview or had the most impressive resume. He's here because when faced with a choice between personal gain and helping someone in need, he chose compassion without hesitation." Thomas had then announced a new company initiative called the 9th Street Standard, a commitment to valuing character as highly as technical skill in their hiring and promotion processes. "From now on," Thomas had declared, "we're adding a new dimension to how we evaluate talent at Brightbridge. We've been focused on finding the brightest minds, and we'll continue to do that, but we'll also be looking for the brightest hearts." Now, as Jalen walked toward the conference room with his presentation ready, he passed the wall where the company's values were displayed. A new addition had been made. Beneath innovation, excellence, and integrity now stood compassion, with a small plaque explaining the 9th Street Standard. Inside the conference room, the executive team waited, including Thomas Waverly. To Jalen's surprise, Florence was there too, sitting beside her son. "Good morning," Jalen greeted them. "Thank you for this opportunity." "We should be thanking you," Thomas replied. "Your story has already changed Brightbridge in profound ways. Show us what you've got, Mr. Carter." For the next 30 minutes, Jalen presented his vision for Code Bridges, an initiative to bring advanced tech education to underserved communities like the one he'd grown up in. The program would partner with community centers, provide equipment, curriculum, and most importantly, mentorship from Brightbridge employees. "This isn't just about teaching kids to code," Jalen explained. "It's about showing them that people who look like them belong in this industry. It's about building bridges between talent and opportunity." When he finished, the room was silent for a moment before Thomas spoke. "The board has already approved funding," he announced. "We're green-lighting this project effective immediately. Jalen, you'll have full autonomy and resources." After the meeting, Florence approached him with a warm smile. "I knew you were special the moment you stopped to help me," she said. "Now everyone else sees it too." Later that evening, Jalen stood in his mother's new kitchen, watching her prepare a celebration dinner. He told her about the approval of Code Bridges, and her face had glowed with pride. "I've been thinking," she said, stirring a pot of his favorite stew. "Maybe everything happens for a reason. If you hadn't missed that interview, I wouldn't have this exact opportunity," Jalen finished. "And Brightbridge might never have created the 9th Street Standard." As they sat down to eat, Jalen's phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Waverly. "Florence insists you join us for Sunday dinner this weekend. She says it's non-negotiable." Jalen smiled, showing the message to his mother, who nodded approvingly. "You didn't just land a job," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. You earned a place where your values are recognized. Your father would be so proud. Outside, the city lights began to twinkle as dusk settled. From their new apartment, Jalen could see the bright bridge tower standing tall among the skyline, its windows illuminated against the darkening sky. But what he saw wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of how a single moment of kindness on 9th Street had changed not only his life but potentially the lives of countless others through ripples that would continue spreading outward. He had earned this new beginning, not by being the smartest or the most qualified, but by being who he had always been, his parents' son, a young man who understood that true success wasn't measured by titles or salaries, but by the lives you touched along the way.